I would imagine most of you, if not all of you, have read First Peter at least once. And you read it and you think, okay, that's nice. What's it all about? And that happens with a lot of books we read in the Bible. We say, hey, that was really great. I wonder what it's about. And so when we read First Peter, and you look at it 2 or 3 times, you begin to understand its context. And the context is this. Peter was in Rome. He was probably in Rome preaching the Gospels prior to his martyrdom. He's in Rome preaching the Gospel, helping the church there. And a message comes to him. We don't know how, but most likely it was a personal written message or by voice. You know, they didn't have the means of communication we have today. But anyway, a message comes to him, or a certain news arrives to him as he's in Rome. And the message is this, that all of the believers in 5 different Roman provinces that today would be found in the country of Turkey, all of the believers in these 5 provinces are suffering severe persecutions and tribulations. And, you know, Peter, he was an apostle. He was a father in the faith. And I think when he heard about all of the believers suffering the persecutions that they were suffering, I have to believe that his heart was moved. I have to believe that he was a man of compassion, particularly having been with Jesus and suffered what he suffered. And so I think when he heard about the believers and all that they were suffering, something in his heart moved. There was compassion. And so what he did was the best thing he could do at that time. He wrote them a letter. He couldn't call them on the phone. He couldn't send them a fax. He couldn't, talk to them on FaceTime. He couldn't go for some reason. But what he did was he sent them a letter. And in this letter, he speaks to them and to their situation with the end in mind of helping them, encouraging them, lifting them up. And he says to them the following, and I'm going to break down his epistle in a very quick way. When I read his epistle, it seems to me that the first thing is he tells them this. Don't forget who you are. You're Christians. You're believers. God has saved you. Stand in your identity as Christians. Don't let the enemy take that away from you. Remember who you are. Because the enemy will always try and make you forget who you are as a child of God in the midst of your sufferings. Because if he can make you forget who you are, then he's taken everything you have. He's taken your armor, he's taken your hope, he's taken everything. So he's saying, wait a minute, you need to understand who you are. You are children of God. You are the people of God. Don't let the enemy rob you of that. And then he goes on a little further and he tells them about how they should conduct themselves. Or in other words, remember who you are. You're Christians, the sons of God. And then after that he says, and keep your conduct good amongst the Gentiles. And really what he's saying is, if they're going to persecute you, and if they're going to slander you, and if they're going to do all that, well, there's not much you can do about it, but make sure that you're suffering unjustly. In other words, I've known Christians, they steal something from their boss at work, and they get fired, and then they say they're being persecuted for Christ. Well, they're not being persecuted for Christ, they're being persecuted because they're thieves. They're Christian thieves, you know what I mean? And the word Christian should cancel out thief, but sometimes it doesn't. So nevertheless, he's saying if you're going to really suffer persecutions, make sure that it's not because you're screwing up, okay? Make sure that it's because of your Christianity. And then he goes a little further, and I think it's in 4:8 or 4:12, and he says, don't be surprised by these things. If you're in persecutions and suffering, stand in Christ, remember who you are, don't let the enemy take it away from you. Understand that you need to conduct yourself in a proper way, as you should, and at the same time, don't be surprised. And sometimes I think we as Christians get surprised by certain sufferings or tribulations that come upon us because we believe the gospel that says if you believe in Jesus, you'll never have another problem again. How many of you know that was a lie? When you get saved, there are certain problems that you have that get canceled, okay? Okay, I'm not a drug addict anymore, I'm not stealing anymore, I'm not doing this, okay. So those problems get canceled. But nevertheless, there's a whole other package of problems that's delivered to your doorstep. And it's due to your identification with Jesus. Jesus said, they hated me without a cause. And what happens is when you and I come to Christ, we think, wow, my life's going to change and I love everybody now. and everybody hates us. And we're thinking, wait a minute. I thought I just accepted the Prince of Peace, and it's like nothing's happening here peace-wise. Everybody's against me now. But what's happening is we've just changed from one kingdom to another, and we've made our allegiance now with Jesus Christ, and so we're with Jesus, but we left one kingdom for another, and we're still in a warfare. So he's telling them, listen, remember who you are. He's telling them, conduct yourselves in a good way. Then he's saying to them, don't be surprised by all of this. And some people are surprised by these things. And then finally, when we come to the verses that we read, it seems to me it's like he's reaching his hands in and he says, let's open the curtains and see what's behind all things. Where's it really coming from? And that's very close to what Paul said in Ephesians 6 when he says, we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers. Now, if we talk about principalities and powers and the devil and all that stuff, we find ourselves thinking about C.S. Lewis. How many of you know who C.S. Lewis is? C.S. Lewis, in his book, I think it was Screwtape Letters, he said something right at the beginning of the book is very interesting. And he says, most Christians seem to fall in one of two extremes. Either they don't believe in the devil, or they believe too much in the devil. And some people, it's like, oh, you believe in the devil? Well, how naive. My goodness, you're like a small child. How stupid can you be? And I'm thinking, how stupid can I be for believing in him? How stupid could you be for not believing in him? But the bottom line is, some people, they just don't believe in these things. Superstitions, Well, there is a devil. But other people, they go to the other extreme. They have to look underneath their bed at night before they go to bed to make sure that Satan's not underneath their bed. And I know of one person many years ago, I heard her testimony, and that was she couldn't get up in the morning because she said all the demons were sitting on her and they were too heavy to get up. So she had to have her niece come over and chase them away like pigeons off a plaza so that, she could get out of bed. And I think, well, that's kind of extreme too. Some people have devil on the brain, you know what I mean? Other people, they just don't think about the devil. But, Peter's a realist, okay? Peter's a realist. He'd been through some battles. He knew that there really is an enemy. And so he's drawing back the curtains and he's saying, listen, let's look at this and see where this is really coming from. Okay, the authorities are upset, the people are upset, people are attacking you, they're persecuting you, and we think this is flesh and blood, but it's not really. It's principalities and powers. And so he tells them this. He says, listen, due to this fact, be sober, be vigilant. Why? Because your enemy, the devil, your adversary, the devil, roams about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he might devour. And he says, resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the sufferings you're suffering are also being accomplished in the brotherhood throughout the nations, in all of the church. So I want to think just a little bit about what he said. Because all of us, whether we know it or not, all of us, whether we know it or not, we're in a spiritual warfare. Some people are oblivious, some people are overly conscious, somewhere in between the two extremes is reality. And so we need to understand that, and we also need to understand how to deal with the situation. Paul in chapter 6 of Ephesians makes a likening unto this, that the spiritual warfare is like a warfare, and he tells you to dress up like this, the Roman soldier and the armor of God, and that's good, I like that. But Peter's kind of hitting it from a different angle. And so Peter's saying, listen, first of all, if you're going to deal with this successfully, you've got to admit that it's true. We have an adversary. What is an adversary? It's somebody who doesn't like us. It's somebody who's against us. It's somebody who wants to do us harm. It's somebody who might want to destroy us. And he tells us that our adversary is the devil. Now, I have concluded, after serving God for 46 years, and having served the other guy for a few years prior to my conversion, I have concluded there really is a devil, and not only one, but there seems to be like a whole bunch of them. And, I've concluded that they don't like me. If the devil likes you, he thinks you're a chump, and he's setting you up to destroy you. because he comes as an angel of light, and he says, oh, my good friend, what can I give you today? Oh, wow, Satan likes me. He's like my rich uncle. And he's giving you all these things, but he's going to destroy you. So we have to understand that there's this adversary, and he doesn't like us. Why doesn't he like us? Have you ever run across people and you just realize, it doesn't make a difference what I say or do, they don't like me. And so the question is, well, why don't they like me? What's the problem? Do I have a problem? Is there something wrong with me? And usually it's something wrong with them. But nevertheless, why doesn't the enemy like us? Number one, his greatest enemy is God. He hates God. Why? Because he tried to pull a fast one on God. He tried to take over, and God bumped him out of the garden, and that was that. I mean, out of the heavens, and he's out. And so he hates God. And you and I have the unfortunate blessing of having been created in the image and likeness of God. And so when he sees us, even in a fallen state, he sees a picture of his worst enemy. Are you with me? Now, I know we all love everybody, and we've never had any enemies or any such things like that, but I've known some people who told me, I didn't like that person, and every time I'd hear his name mentioned, I'd get angry. Every time I'd see their picture, I'd get angry. And I hate that person. And just anything related to that person, to bring their image before my eyes, was too much. Just set me on fire. Well, how would you like to be the devil? How many human beings are on the face of the earth right now? 8 billion pictures of God. Are you with me? And so wherever he turns, the poor guy must be tormented, to be honest. Because wherever he turns, he sees living images of the person that he hates the most. I really think the guy's smoked. I think there's something wrong with him. You know what I mean? I mean, he's got some problems. Because he's living in a world that all he sees is the image of the person he hates the most. And there he is. And what can he do? So in his anger and in his fury, he lashes out. How many of you, when you were in high school, saw a picture of somebody you didn't like, and you either took a knife and put an X in it, or a mustache, or put sunglasses on it, or take one tooth out or something like that? And it's because you didn't like them. How many of you know what I'm saying? Well, the enemy, in his fury, I'll use it, this mad fury against God, lashes out at man who's been created in his image and likeness. And when he's able to destroy a human being, really, he's expressing what he'd like to be able to do with God. But he can't destroy God. He will never destroy God. And in the end, God's going to destroy him. He's not going to annihilate him, but he's going to send him to a lake of fire for eternity. And that's very disturbing for the enemy. But what it is, it's a hatred. And he hates us, number one, because we're created in the image and likeness of God. And anytime he can deface that and destroy that and make that ugly, it gives him a certain sense of satisfaction in his hatred. And that's why he tries to destroy people. But also, there's another reason why he doesn't like us. And I'm going to tell you what it is. It's Jesus Christ. Do you realize that each one of us represents defeat to him? He had us under his thumb, and, we were in the Egypt of this world, and he was doing what he wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, Jesus comes like Moses, and he comes to every one of us, and he sets us free. He delivers us. Thank you, my brother. And all of a sudden, we're set free through the Son of God. And so every Christian, even the youngest Christian, whoever he is a symbol of defeat, because he could not prevent God from saving that person. And it's just like God just comes and snatches somebody right out of the lion's mouth, and the lion can do nothing about it. And so he's upset because in every one of us, he sees the triumph of Jesus Christ, which makes him feel like a loser. And he is a loser. But he's the proudest being that there is in all of creation. And when you're very proud and somebody shows you you're a loser, the biggest loser that there's ever been, that doesn't go well. So what happens is he's constantly looking at us and saying, they escaped, he took them from me, and he's angry and he's frustrated by our salvation. So what he tries to do with us is to knock us down. He tries to separate us from Christ. He tries to bring us back into bondage. because that's a little bit of relief for his wickedness. But the bottom line is he doesn't like us, and he's never going to like us. If Satan is your best friend and he's being nice to you, he is setting you up, and he is setting you up for destruction. So therefore, I find this in the Bible, Jesus didn't even really talk to him. He just told him to be quiet on a few occasions. And I've known some people, they think they're really spiritual because they get into some sort of dialogue with the devil, and then they want you to hear the tape recording of their conversation with the devil. And I'm thinking, are you nuts or what? This guy is smarter than you are. He's deceptive. He's been deceiving people for millennia. And you're going to have a decent conversation with him where he's going to tell you the truth and confess all of his sins to you? You're smoking too much dope. That's really what's happening. And so the bottom line is he doesn't like us, and he attacks us. And I'm going to tell you something really terrible. There is no Christian exempt from this. Nobody's exempt. If you have Jesus written on your forehead, he doesn't like you. You're his enemy. And so he's going to go after you to try and destroy you, to recapture you, to nullify the work of God in your life. So when we see that, and Peter sees that, and he says, guys, okay, you're getting persecuted and all this is happening, but where's it coming from? What's the fountain? Why? It's more than flesh and blood. It goes beyond flesh and blood. It goes to principalities and powers. It goes to the fact that we have an implacable adversary, the devil. This guy never quits. But the grace of God is sufficient. Are you with me? So let me say this. He tells these people, he says, okay, here's the problem. You need to be sober and vigilant because you have an adversary, the devil. And he roams around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. If you like movies, I'm going to recommend a movie to you. And we were watching it the other night because I said, we should watch this movie again because there's so many spiritual principles in it. And it's called The Ghost in the Darkness. Has anybody seen The Ghost in the Darkness? If you haven't seen that movie and you're interested in spiritual warfare, watch that movie. And you say, well, what's it about? Well, it's about the English trying to build a bridge in South Africa, and the tribes didn't want them to come through. And it seems to me that they, what would be the word? They took a couple of lions and they put something on these lions, and these lions became man-eaters, and they began attacking the work crew and acting really more like demons than lions. And the workers began to say, these aren't real lions. This isn't the real lion. This isn't how they'd act. This is the devil himself. And everybody left. But in the end, they overcame. But what I want to say is there's some things you can see in that movie that makes you think, wow, this is how it is. But nevertheless, the lions, he says, the enemy is like a lion roaming around, wandering around, roaring, seeking whom he might devour. Lions roar to paralyze other people and other things with fear. And it's very interesting in this movie, at nighttime, the lions would roam around the camp, and they would roar. We have a friend in Puebla, they have a thing called African, and it's like this wild animal park, and they have a bunch of lions there. And I go down there and I talk to him, about the lions, and we go see the lions and all this stuff because they fascinate me. But he said when he built his house, all the workers quit one night. And I said, what do you mean? He says, 2 days into the work, they quit. And I said, why? He says, because they heard the lions roaring at night, and they thought they were loose and they were going to come and eat them, so they all quit and went home. But the lions roaming around, roaring, seeking whom they might devour. We have to remember that there are such things. So Peter tells these people, he says, listen, I'm going to tell you what to do. He says, you got to be sober. He says, you have to be vigilant. You have to resist them, firm in your faith. And if you do that, the Bible says, James says, if you resist the devil, he will flee from you. But I'm going to insert something here real quick, okay? When I was in Bible school in the last century, the last millennium, when I was in Bible school, there was another student there who was from Kenya. And he was from the Maasai tribe. The Maasai, they're tall, they're thin, they're fierce warriors. They live off the cows. They drink their blood and they drink their milk, and that's basically their diet. And the Maasai are very, very ferocious people. So anyway, I began talking to him, and I said, hey, tell me about the lions in Africa. Who do they eat? And he says, the lions usually go after one of four types of things. And they said if it's a tribe, or let's say it's a herd of zebras. If it's a herd of zebras, the lions will always go after one of four types of the zebras. They said the first one they'll have to go after is the newborn, the ones that are young. And that's because they don't have the ability to defend themselves. So they have to stay always in the shadow of their mother. They always have to be within the protection of the herd. Because if in any way, shape, or form a lion can get in there, he'll go after the baby zebra and they'll kill it because it can't take care of itself. And so I started thinking, well, that's true. I've seen this in the church many times where somebody's born again, they come in, they're born again, and they're just starting out, and then it seems like the lions come. And many of these newborns are devoured by the enemy, and it's because they didn't have any protection, or nobody was mentoring them, or nobody was watching over them, and they were just all by themselves. And so the lions come, and they eat them. I'm going to say something. If you win somebody for Christ, take some responsibility to mentor, to disciple, to cover that person. Because here's what we all do in the church. We win somebody to Christ, and we come and tell the pastor, we just won somebody for Christ. Take, And we throw that person at the pastor, and he's already got 100. And, it's like, wait a minute, you gave birth. You're the one that brought him into the kingdom. You do it. You know what I'm saying? Help me out. Amen. And I think that, you follow me? And I think that we need to take responsibility. And I think if we bring somebody into the kingdom, we need to think a little further and say, okay, then I need to help them and help them get established. And if you hear that, somebody will say, well, I'm not going to bring anybody in then. No. We have to do that. But if we don't, I remember when I was first a Christian, I would win some people to the Lord, and I thought, I got to stay in touch with these people. I need to call them, I need to be the friend, I need to help them get to church, I need to answer their questions, whatever it is, in order to stabilize them. Because if we abandon them, they'll be on his plate, the other guy's plate. So we have to understand that the lions will go after the newborn, okay? Then the lions will go after the animal that has somehow strayed away from the herd. There's protection in the herd. If you look at it, there's a lot of animals, there's protection, and so they all stay together. But if one of them wanders off, he's no longer around the protection of the herd. It's very interesting in this movie, The Ghost in the Darkness, they report to the head guy in the morning, we lost another man last night. What happened? Why? Well, he just went wandering off in the darkness by himself. Just as he walked out of the camp and went wandering off in the darkness by himself. Oh, okay. Well, he got eaten up. Now, I know that Jesus is our pastor. But, he's also put pastors in the body of Christ. And, some days if we're not pastors, then we're sheep. And even if we're pastors, we still need a pastor. And so the truth of the matter is, we can't just go wandering off by ourselves. Because we need the protection of the herd. We need the protection of pastoral ministry over us, or we could end up getting eaten. I've noticed something, and forgive me, it's not a generality, it's totally true. But I've noticed that the people who wander the farthest are the ones who have the greatest problems. Should I say that again? Those who wander the farthest from the herd, from the flock, from the church, from pastoral covering, those are the ones who have the greatest problem with the devil, and it's because they're vulnerable. They're exposed. And somehow there's a spirit of deception upon them that says it could never happen to me, or I can do it myself, or I don't need them, and I don't need that. And, we live in the United States where everybody's, and nobody needs anybody because we can do it all ourselves. But the bottom line is, that's not the way it's set up. I was just reading in First Peter where Peter calls Jesus, he calls him the shepherd and guardian of our souls in the NASV. In other words, the shepherd and the protector of our souls. And we're in the flock of God because we've been born again and Jesus is the good shepherd. But Jesus has taken the church, his flock, and he's broken it up in different groups and he says, here, you take care of this, you take care of this, you take care of this, and you take care of this. And when somebody says, well, I don't like the pastors, or I don't want to be under a pastor, or I don't want to do this, I can do it myself, you're really actually going counter Bible. And it can end up very, 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 very detrimental to your health, if not to the health of your children. And so the lions will go after those who are straying. Okay? Are you with me? We need to stick together. I hate to say it that way, but we need to stick together. The third type of animal that the lions go after, are those that are sick or injured. An injured zebra can't really defend himself to his maximum potential. Can't run, perhaps, to his maximum potential. And because he's injured, he's weakened. Or if he's sick, he's weakened. I can't prove what I'm going to say, but I remember one day watching something like on NGO, National Geographic. They talked about animals, wild animals, having the ability to fake that they're well when they're not. And it's a defensive measure. It's in order to fake out their enemy, to make them think they're in good shape when they're not really in good shape. And if you're bitter, if you're angry, if you're moving in immoralities, if you're stealing, who knows what you're doing, you're sick. You have a spiritual sickness. And sin always weakens us. I mean, there's no way about it. Sin is like kryptonite, and you're Superman. You got it? And the more kryptonite you got, the weaker you are, and finally you can be eaten up by your enemies. And sin really does weaken us, and we also get wounded, we get hurt, we get this, we get that. And these things weaken us, and we have to really deal with those things, because if we don't, we're not going to overcome. A sick army will always lose the battle. Are you with me? That doesn't mean that a healthy army will always win, because sometimes it's healthy and lazy. But nevertheless, it comes down to this, that we have to be careful about these things. And if you are, I'm going to put it this way, if you have sin in your life, you're like somebody swimming in the ocean with an open wound and the blood is coming into the water, and all of the sharks are going to begin to smell that blood, and they're going to come for lunch. And you are lunch. You follow me? Same with sickness. So we have to be very careful. So the enemy comes after the newborn. The enemy comes after the straying. The enemy comes after the sick and the injured. And the last one I don't like. Says he comes after the old. Why? Because the old are not as strong as they used to be. They're not as agile as they used to be. They don't have the same quickness in order to defend themselves, or the same energy that they had before. And there is something about when you get older, I'm beginning to discover, I just don't have what I used to have, energy, mental, and all this. And that concerns me, because I think, is that making me a mark? Is that making me a target for the enemy? Because let me say what I'm going to say. Satan has no shame. He has no ethics. You follow what I'm saying? There's no ethics books. There's no, nothing like that. He has no shame. He's a dirty player. You got it? And so sometimes we get older and we begin to lose the edge in many things. But we have to really be careful to not lose the edge spiritually. And I do believe this, that in a way, as you get older, God knows you're getting older. So it seems to me sometimes he starts pumping more grace into you instead of less. You follow? And young people say, grace? I don't need grace. I have all the strength in the world. Okay, well, let's wait 50 years and we'll talk about it again. And what happens is that the grace, a lot of things begin to subside in your life and you need more grace. And that's where you think, well, I sure am glad that Peter or Paul said this, that when the outer man is deteriorating, the inner man's being renewed, because the outer man begins to deteriorate. But the inner man, well, what about it? Well, we can draw near to God and he will minister to us and he will help us. But I would say this to say the following. We do need to take care of the older saints in our midst. I've talked, and my wife has talked, and I'm sure you've heard the stories. You go visit some poor old saint that's been in her home for how many knows, and you say, what about your kids? Oh, they all abandoned me, they all left me, they don't want to serve God, and so I'm just here by myself. And you think, what a tragedy. And then you think, well, we have a certain responsibility. We need to help these people out because there's a bigger family than the nuclear family, and it's the family of God. And we need to watch out for these people and take care of these people because they need our help. You know, I'm going to say this, when you look at an older saint who's 95 years old and, you know, their best days have gone by, sometimes we think, well, you know, whatever. But, you know, they're going to be raised from the dead. And when they're raised from the dead, they're going to be raised gloriously. And you're going to say, wow, you know, I had an aunt who died at 96, and I didn't know her until she was like 60-something because that's when I was born. And, you know, finally she told us one day, she said, I always want to live to be 100. She said, but I think that was a mistake. And I said, well, why? Well, she says, I can't see. I have this problem. I have that problem. She says, if I could do it again, I'd chop 20 years off this thing, you know. But I never knew my auntie in the prime of her glory. Are you with me? But someday I will, in the resurrection. And we should not despise anybody. And we live in a culture that once upon a time honored the elderly. Now they're pushed off the scene, and we worship youth. And that's a losing proposition because you're worshiping a fading God who in the end is, I mean, it's all over. So everybody goes to the gym and they take vitamins and they do this in order to resurrect the fading God. But you know what? It just doesn't work. You know, you can petrify yourself taking so many vitamins, but in the end, it just ain't going to happen because you're going against what is nature. Curse of death upon the human race. But anyway, Peter's saying this. He says, listen, guys, there is an enemy out there. He's roaming around, seeking whom he may devour. But it's not because he's hungry. He just wants to destroy. I mean, it's not like Satan, oh man, I need some pork chops, or I need, something like that. It's not that way. The only reason he wants to devour is hatred. That's it. And as much as God loves us, to a degree, the enemy hates us, although his hatred is limited because he's limited and God's love is infinite. There is no limit. But I mean, you talk about the contrast. It's just the two. I remember when I was first saved 100 years ago, prior to my conversion, I must confess I prayed to the spirits, and they answered. But the problem was when I got saved, they tried to hang around. And I can remember one day I was in my mother's house. It was a Sunday afternoon. I'd gone to church. And I'm in my mother's house in the living room. Nobody's there. And I'm just kind of sitting there looking out the window, kind of spaced out. And all of a sudden, boom, there was a presence. And when it came, I started to pray. But it was the presence of what I'm going to call pure hatred. And it began literally to circle me, to go around. I thought, wow, that's like a lion. And it's just going around me like this. And it scared me. And so I began to pray. And I really began to pray, and this thing just intensified. It's going around me, and I just really start to pray with everything I got, praying in tongues and everything else. And the Spirit of God came down. And I came to a point where it was okay. I sensed the strength of the Lord, and I rebuked this thing, and it left. Why? Because Christ is greater. But it was just the pure hatred, really, that impacted me. I thought, there's no love or anything like that in this thing. It's pure hatred, and he comes dressed as an angel of light. And I need to be careful. So anyway, Peter says this. He says, guys, there's this enemy roaming around like a roaring lion, and he wants to devour you. Not because he's hungry. He just wants to rip you apart and destroy you. So he says, you got to be sober. He says you have to be vigilant. You have to resist him, firm in your faith. Now, I think we all know that sober, we understand sober as not drunk, because you can be sober and then you begin to drink, and as you drink and more you drink, you begin to lose your faculties. Your mind goes who knows where. You can't stand up. You can't do a lot of things. And the drunker you are, the more defenseless you are. If you're sober, Okay, you're watching, you know. But if you're drunk, you're finished. Anybody can come along and whack you. And he's saying spiritually, we have to be sober. In other words, I think he's saying we have to have a spirit that's not mixed with the things of this world. If I have the spirit of covetousness and I let that into my heart, my heart is no longer sober because it's no longer pure. And there's a mixture of things in there. And it's that leavening of covetousness that really distracts me and puts me out in another area where I'm no longer thinking about the enemy, and he can actually come disguised as who knows what and actually add to that problem. Immoralities, the same way. Hatred, the same way. These are all things that get mixed into our being, and we have to be careful. We have to have a pure heart and a pure mind. We have to be sober. I was telling you about this movie we were watching. There was 2 lions, and they finally shot one. So what did they do? They broke out the champagne. And they broke out the champagne, and it was 3 men, and each one drank a bottle of champagne. Stone drunk. You know what happened? In the night, the other lion came and killed one of them. Why? Because he was drunk. And if he hadn't been drunk, he'd have been sober, and it would never have happened. There's an intoxicating effect that this world has upon us that can many times dull us, desensitize us to spiritual things, and we just become deaf, dumb, and blind, and the enemy eats us. We have to be sober. At the same time, Peter says we have to be vigilant. Well, in other words, we have to peel an eye and, make sure and kind of look around us. And I find this, let's see if this isn't true. Most of us don't know the devil has come until he's already gotten there. I don't know if you know what I'm saying. A friend of mine called me from Cancun the other day, Pastor. He said, Pastor, we came to Cancun to rest. We're tired. And ever since we got here, we've been fighting, my wife and I. We almost got in a fist fight last night. And I said, well, what do you expect? You went down there to rest. The enemy says, I'm not going to let him rest. So he's there. He was waiting for you at the airport. And so, therefore, he's got you guys in a fight. And I said, you need to wake up. Oh, you think it's the devil? Yeah, I really do. I said, I think you guys need to get together, forget it, and rebuke him and send him the way he belongs. And then you can have a nice vacation. But they were not vigilant. It didn't occur to them. And again, I'm saying some people are overly conscious of the devil, and they're looking out the peephole in the door. Is that the devil out there? It's not quite that way. But you have to be sensitive to the possibility that he could be coming. There are days he comes to our house and we don't know it until after he arrived. There are other days when it's like we're sitting there and all of a sudden, did you feel that? Do you sense that? And we realize, okay, somebody just came uninvited. Are you with me? You have to be sensitive, vigilant. Let me ask you a question. If you were in Africa and you were on a compound and you knew there was a roaring lion out there at night wandering around, what would you be doing? Breaking open a bottle of champagne and having a great party? Or would you be sober and vigilant, which means you would be watching? Because at any moment in time, that lion could come bounding out of the darkness and try to grab a hold of you. And if you're not vigilant, you're not watching, he just might get a hold of you. But if you're watching, oh, here he comes, let's shoot him. We'll give him a punch in the nose in a way, And it's like, you have to be vigilant. Are you with me? And he says, you have to be sober, you have to be vigilant. And he says you have to resist him. What does that mean? You can't turn your back and run from the devil. If you're out in the jungle and there's a lion coming and you turn around and you start to run, that lion runs faster than you do. He's stronger than you do. And no matter what you do, you're finished, Now, it's very interesting. In this movie we're watching, the lion comes up and this guy runs and he climbs a tree. And he actually got up beyond where the lion could get in the tree. And that's not a bad illustration either. If the lion's coming, maybe I need to climb a tree. Not a real tree, but maybe I need to get on the cross and climb the tree and get into heavenly places. And then all of a sudden, he's not going to be able to reach a hold of me. But you know, we have to resist the devil. Have you noticed that he's always trying to make you afraid of him? That's one of his major deals, to make us to be afraid of him. I'm going to ask you a question. Should we be afraid of him? I'm going to say no and yes. We shouldn't be afraid of him if we know who we are and we can stand firm in our faith. But I think we should always have this little bit of respect, like, okay, I know who this guy is. He's got a lot of tricks. And so I'm not going to be afraid, but I'm going to be afraid. But in order to stand firm, you kind of have to get up a little bit of courage to stand firm. There are days when really that's all you can do. He comes, he roars, he attacks, and all you can do is get on your knees and say, you know what? I resist. I refuse to surrender. Let come what will. I'm not going to surrender. I'm going to resist. And if we resist him, James says, if we resist the devil, he will flee from us. Many times as a couple, it's amazing how Satan comes and stands between us and gets us in a big fight with each other. Are you with me? And so what we have to do is stop fighting and say, wait a minute, we're not enemies of each other. We have a common enemy. The common enemy is the enemy. So why don't we join ranks and why don't we rebuke the enemy and cast him out, and then now we will live in peace. Are you with me? I'm going to say one more thing and then I'm going to quit because time's gone. It says we must resist him firm in our faith. You know what he wants to do? Is undermine our faith. Jesus is baptized in the river. Thou art my son in whom I'm well pleased. Goes out in the desert. Are you really the Son of God? Give me a break. Are you really the Son of God? Here, why don't you multiply these stones, turn them into bread, jump off the temple, do something to make me believe that you're really the Son of God. And you know, as long as we realize and we believe, I am a son of God. I am a child of God. I do have his authority. He does back me up. If we stand firm in our faith, we might have to exercise our faith. But if we stand firm in that, we're going to make it. But if he manages to undermine our faith, he can push us back. There was a Puritan named Matthew Henry who wrote a commentary many, 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 many years ago, still in print. And in Genesis 3, when talking about the enemy coming and tempting Adam and Eve, he says Satan has had a tactic that he's used from the beginning of the world. And it's this. First, he gets you to doubt so that he can get you to deny. Are you the Son of God? Boy, I don't know. No, you're not. Oh, I'm not? No, you're not. Oh, okay. Thanks. And he always gets you to doubt in order to deny. So we don't even doubt. What do? We take up the shield of faith, which is, what does the Bible say? Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. You'll find in the desert that every time that Satan came, Jesus lifted up the shield of faith, and he said, nope, it's written. And you and I, we have to take up the shield of faith, which is the word of God, and we have to stand firm in our faith. And when we do that, we quench the fiery darts of the enemy, and in the end, he takes off. He goes, does something else, some other place. But anyway, let's just think for a second, and we're going to finish. They're in problems, persecution, tribulations, etc. Peter hears about it. He writes them. And he says, number one, don't forget who you are. Number two, he says, behave yourselves like you should behave yourselves. Number three, don't be surprised. But number four, let's look behind everything and see where this stuff is really coming from. It's your adversary, the devil. He's roaming about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he might devour or destroy. And it seems like he's got his eyes on you. So here's what you need to do. You need to be sober. Get rid of anything in your heart that might cause you to become blind or deaf. Be sober. Then he says, be vigilant. Keep your eyes open. Then he says, resist him. Firm in your faith. And let me say this. God will always give us the grace to resist him, because greater is he that's within us than he that's within the world.